Wake up, Twins territory, and welcome to a special Monday night prospect handbook edition to our Twins Hangout. I'm Jeremy Nygaard, joined by Seth Stowes. I'm not Seth Stowes, and also Cody Christie. See, now what happened is Seth and I had a nice little heated discussion before we went live, and it was probably way better than anything you listen to now. But basically, what it boils down to is that Seth is crazy, and I'm always right. And I think Cody backs me up on that one. So, guys, how you doing?
Wow.
How you doing tonight, boys?
I'm doing good, but how are you tonight, Cody? That's really what's most important here.
I'm doing okay. Trying to stay warm up here in the northern regions. I'm sure it was colder where you were, Seth, than it was here today, but it was a brisk one.
Not much. W Town was at like 15 below. How was F Town this morning?
With wind chill it was like 26 below or something, but
Yeah.
I think we were only negative 11 right without the wind chill. But
Very good.
It's typically a little bit warmer in Wisconsin, but that might just have to be because the college football team was so hot that it heated up our whole state. I don't know.
And you probably just lost like 2 or 3 more followers after a comment like that.
Hey, Seth, did you think I was getting nervous?
Not even a little bit.
No.
No, because, I expected Wisconsin to win by 20. The fact that they only won by like 10, they should be embarrassed. They should fire their head coach too, probably.
Yeah.
That's what Nebraska did after they lost to the Gophers, and I would think Wisconsin only beating the Gophers by 10. That's embarrassing for them.
I think Pelini got fired more as a result of what the Badgers did to him, and then what the Gophers were able to do to him when there was like no fight whatsoever.
Right.
Not really.
And we should maybe talk a little bit, since it's frigid outside and the hot stove, at least from the Twins' perspective, hasn't really started yet. But something that I know a lot of Twins fans or a lot of people that listen to us certainly appreciate is we're just about ready to release the 2015 Minnesota Twins Prospect Handbook. For me, I think it's my 7th annual Prospect Handbook. And, Jeremy and Cody, I think, have been writing and doing a lot of the work and being the co-authors at least, the last 2 years? 3 years?
I think this is year 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is year 3 for sure.
I tell this probably every year, but when I first did the first edition of this, it had just a plain, I think, red cover with boring writing on it, and it was about 75 pages. And then the second year, it was about 120 pages. Then the third year, I think it was about 170 pages, and the last 3 or 4 years, it's been 180 to 200 pages. So that's why I obviously appreciate these guys, coming in and helping out and really doing the, lion's share of the work, and we're making it work. So, I think we're excited about what's going to be another good product. But, we thought we'd spend a little bit of time tonight just kind of talking over what the book's going to have and, some of the key things. I mean, obviously the meat and potatoes of the book are the prospect profiles. And this year we did it just a little bit differently. We did, again, their background. Jeremy wrote backgrounds, which was, their amateur status and then what they did in previous years if they've been in the organization for a while. And then Cody took a stab at kind of trying to summarize and give a statistical backing of the players and what they did in 2014. And then I did a scouting report on each of the, about 160 players. Trying to get a little bit more into that side of it. And then, Jeremy was kind of in charge of the forecasting for 2015, and we're kind of going through some of those and talking through where we think guys will be, their status for that 2015 season. So I guess what I'd like to do is start with Cody, and, I think you had a pretty tough job, and that was to kind of take a look at 2014 for each and every player. And, without giving away your trade secrets, Cody, what was the secret, or what did you find most interesting about the research for the 2014?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the toughest things, or a couple of the toughest things, were some of the big name prospects had injuries throughout the year. So I mean, it's hard to look at what Byron Buxton did in this past season and get a grasp on the type of player that he is overall when he just wasn't on the field very consistently, and we saw that with other prospects. Miguel Sano never even saw the field. So for some guys like that, it's tough to get a grasp on what they were able to do while they were on the field. And then with some other guys, that are playing in some of the shorter leagues, you don't get the same amount of plate appearances or innings pitched. So, one bad outing by a pitcher can really bring down the numbers. So sometimes it's important to go, delve into it a little deeper and look at, if you take out that one or two bad starts that a pitcher had, what would his numbers look like after doing something like that? So that's some of what I tried to do with some of their different recaps. I mean, looking for good months that they had. Maybe did they end the year on a stronger note than where they started the year? Some of the guys, they play, in some cold weather at the beginning of the year. Sometimes that can impact hitters, especially if they're from some of the Latin American countries. So there's a lot of stuff to take into account, just even when you're looking at only 1 year of their work in the minor leagues.
You mentioned that, and I know a guy like Steven Gonsalves, I think he only had about 8 starts with the Colonels after his promotion, and if you look at his overall numbers, they look fairly pedestrian. But then you look at the game by game and realize I think he gave up 6 runs in 2 innings in his final start of the year after a long year, and that just makes his numbers go from really, really good for a 20-year-old in the Midwest League to not necessarily looking great. But so I think you make a good point. Was there a player when you were doing your research that, I don't know, made you do a double take? Like, you had heard of the name and you had, thought of him before, probably on Talk to Contacts podcast, maybe even done a minor league segment on the guy or something. But, was there a guy that really jumped out to you as maybe a little better of a prospect than you had previously thought?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Sometimes when we've been working on this for a while, it's been a little bit since I've tackled some of these profiles head on. So I mean, I think there were some impressive seasons by, what Adam Brett Walker was able to do as far as, just the sheer power numbers that he was able to put up in the Florida State League, which is, known to be more of a pitcher's league. And we've seen good numbers put up by guys like Sano and Buxton there in the last couple of years. But I think that really impressed me about him. I'm trying to think if there was a pitcher off the top of my head that sticks out to me. I think Chai Wee Hu. He was able to do with the Colonels. I think that kind of surprised me. He was a name that was a little bit off my radar coming into the season, and so for him to go through Elizabethton and Cedar Rapids this year and still have some pretty decent numbers. Both guys that are going to be prominent names on in our top 30 list for sure.
So, Jeremy, you took care of the background. Is there anyone a certain story of a player that kind of stood out to you while you were doing the research?
I guess the answer to that's probably not, just simply because I did this for all the guys last year that were already in the organization, and obviously following the draft as closely as I do, knew a lot of the backgrounds of the guys, obviously, that were already, that weren't already in the organization last year, but didn't just join the league. And we had talked a couple weeks ago about some guys that stood out, and Mottner was one guy that jumped out to me as I was writing his profile this year. And we talked about that briefly. I think that was, 3 weeks ago. Tyler Montner, who was drafted in the 14th round out of Buffalo. He was a guy that I think that, they drafted him when his stock was pretty low. Had been injured, but has shown some power and has had success in some summer leagues. So he's a guy that, just based on what I've done this winter, that he'll be a guy that I keep a closer eye on next year as the season progresses. And there's other stories, like obviously the Brandon Polson story is one that we've all heard at this point. Coming out of I think it was Academy of Art in California, and now getting a relatively large signing bonus to come throw a few innings for Elizabethton, but just the background that he wasn't much of a pitcher, and then all of a sudden he's throwing 100 miles an hour with a 93 mile an hour slider, and put him on a mound next to Nick Birdie, and I think scouts would prefer the delivery of Polson instead of Birdie, and Birdie's a guy that's now in top tens of every prospect list, but Polson's got a ways to go. Obviously, you get him in a game and he's not striking guys out, and he's losing some of his control, but like Cody mentioned, you have a guy that has one bad start and it skews their numbers, and I don't think there was a worse start to any professional career of any guy the Twins have than Birdie had in his pro debut. So just little stuff like that. Who had are you throwing someone that had a worse start?
No, I was at the Birdie's first appearance,
right.
When he walked all 4 batters he faced.
Right. So I mean. And his numbers didn't look. I mean, his numbers still looked okay, but you take away that first appearance that he had, and all of a sudden his numbers are way better. There was a pitcher that I want to make sure that I have this right. Theophanopoulos, I think, was just a guy that, based on some research, he was drafted a little bit later in the draft. I want to say like the 30th round. But then just some of the research that I found on him, he had also had undergone an injury and wasn't at full strength for his for most of the drafts, the draft season leading up to the draft. And he was just a guy that I thought, I'll probably keep an eye on him. He pitched in the GCL, played outfield at California, and also pitched, and broke his hand and missed most of the college season. So he ended up falling to the 30th round. But he was a guy that had done some summer stuff and had kind of jumped up some charts, and mostly through playing outfield. But those the guys that go two ways in college, and then all of a sudden, start focusing on something, you might see an uptick in velocity and have a prospect there. And I think JT Chagua is another guy. Not based on anything he did this year, but regains his health and all of a sudden is pumping it in the high 90s, and that's kind of the thing that's in vogue in the major leagues right now. So you take a guy that hasn't really done anything professionally, and all of a sudden he's popping up on prospect lists. So there's a few names that are just they're continue to intrigue, and I think obviously more names will pop up as we continue through the winter, and other people that read this story will probably read one thing about a guy and all of a sudden become a fan of him without having ever heard of him before. And that's, I think, what makes this neat. That's what made it neat when you first did it in 2009, and probably still what makes it neat for me 7 years later.
Well, as for one guy who stepped up in yours, and we got like 7, even though you couldn't think of anyone off the top of your head. But you're obviously the draft guru. You did a story for this on kind of looking back at the 2014 draft and obviously all the picks the Twins made there. But you also looked ahead to the 2015 draft and gave some names. And it's a question we get a lot. And as you know, I mean, it's hard to know right now who would be available to the Twins when they pick at, do they pick 5 this year? 6 this year? I mean, it's impossible to know, who would be available. But, Jeremy provides a bunch of names of guys with a little bit of a background so that, if you read it, you can kind of start getting an idea of who you might want to start following as the spring goes along. Cody, you did a story. You mentioned it before. You did a story also for this on all the injuries. Is there something from that story? I mean, we know Sano, Buxton. I mean, Rosario had the suspension. I mean, it wasn't just those guys. It was a lot of the top prospects missed some time with something. That was just astonishing to have lost so many players.
Yeah, as we were setting out and kind of coming up with our stories and the direction this book was going to take for this recapping this last season, I just felt like we needed to have something in the book that just touched on, I mean, all the guys within the system that had missed some time. I mean, we saw, I mean, even most of the pitchers that are in our top tens missed at least a little bit of time, from Meyer and Cole Stewart, and maybe even just sleeping on his arm wrong on the bus trip one time, and that maybe causing some shoulder inflammation, even Jose Barrios with his great season that he had. He had some shoulder tightness one time where he missed a start or got pulled from a start, but he was able to bounce back from that nicely. We're still waiting to hear about Lewis Thorpe. Is he going to have to undergo Tommy John surgery? And had some elbow sprain in his throwing elbow. So a lot of guys, even Nick Gordon, the newest addition or newest first-round draft pick by the Twins, ended up fracturing his finger. And didn't get to play in the playoffs for the E-Twins as they were trying to go for another Appy League title. So, but it was lots of other guys too. I mean, Max Kepler, Mason Melitakis, Zach Jones, Corey Williams, Luke Bard. I touch on a lot of them just briefly at the end of the story that I wrote up about them. But it was definitely a theme, something that we saw throughout this last season, and hopefully it's something that we don't have to focus on for next year's book, where I mean, injuries are going to happen, it's part of the game, but it felt like they happened in waves this year for the Twins system, and more specifically for the guys that are near the top of the prospect charts for this system.
All right, so we've got surprise as far as the forward, and that will be announced here shortly. Who wrote that? We've got a story on the Cedar Rapids Colonels 2014 season from Steve Boer. We've got articles coming from a couple of other of your favorite Twins bloggers that we'll obviously share more information with. Jeremy's got a story on just how much the Twins are doing internationally. But like I said, the meat and potatoes are the hitting and the pitching profiles. As we've done in the past, Twins Daily kind of comes up with their hitter, minor league hitter, starting pitcher, relief pitcher, and manager of the year. I know I wrote up the player ones, and Cody wrote up the one on Doug Minkiewicz. The fun thing about that for me is getting quotes from those players, but also from their teammates. And it's, for instance, it was overwhelming to hear the types of things that teammates and coaches and front office said about Mitch Garver, not only as a player but as a person, about Brandon Peterson, who was the relief pitcher of the year, about the type of stuff he has and how he works, and talking to him as a Minnesotan too, and his interests on and off the field. And also J.O. Barrios was kind enough to respond to a bunch of questions, and there's definitely a theme that comes into his teammates and coaches' minds when it comes to him, and it's just how hard he works, and that comes through from everybody. You see it on his Twitter feed, you see it on Facebook, but he is putting in some serious work. Plus, he became a dad this year too, and turned 20. So we asked him some questions that were beyond baseball as well, just to kind of get to know him. Cody, anything on the Minkiewicz research that you found interesting? And it was hard to get kind of any information on him because obviously he was in the middle of trying to determine if he could get the big league job or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, obviously they've had a lot of success the last couple seasons down there in Fort Myers, and his couple years at the helm of that team. Had some very good prospects to work with, but that can be tough too to kind of to mesh those different personalities together. And you had, I mean, he's had a lot of players that make that jump from his team up to Double A throughout the season. So I kind of talked about some of the players he lost throughout the year, and he still seemed to be able to find ways to win, and he pulled the right strings. I liked one of my favorite quotes that's in the article came from Matt Tomshaw. And he said, this team was very talented, and all year we found ways to win. But without Doug molding and manipulating our strengths, we would not have won the Florida State League title. He brings a fire to the game that is contagious. I just thought that kind of summed up what Mankiewicz meant to that team, and why he was in the running for the Twins managerial job. That he's done some very good things within the organization, and who knows? It sounds like he could get the bump up either to Chattanooga or to Rochester, since there's openings with those clubs, and we'll see. He could be moving his way up the Twins ladder, even though he didn't get the big league job.
All right, we're going to try to keep this, I believe, to about a half an hour, maybe 35 minutes at most. You just heard the voice of Cody Christie. He's the Nodak Twins fan, one of the co-authors of the 2015 Minnesota Twins Prospect Handbook, and also with me is Jeremy Nygaard, the other co-author. Jeremy, I'm curious your thoughts. In my opinion, we do all this research, we hear all these comments, these opinions, and then we come up with our top 30s. All three of us do. So I'm just curious your thoughts. Who's a guy in your mind that moved up farther on your prospect ranking than you either had him last year or thought that you would have him before doing all the research?
Well, that's an excellent question, Seth.
Thanks. That's why I asked it.
Well, the one guy that I have ranked higher than anybody else is Tyler Duffy, who kind of figured some stuff out, not right away in the season, so he didn't get off to a great start, but kind of figured some stuff out with his changeup, I believe it was, and made the move up pretty high, making it to Rochester, and that's something that I don't think gets talked about enough. You take a guy like Jason Wheeler, who got just added to the 40-man. He made one start, and it was out of necessity that he was called up. There was a pitcher that got hurt, or a pitcher that got called up, and just so happened that Wheeler was on the same rotation. He makes one start and gets called up to Rochester and sent right back down. But Duffy, he was a little bit different. Duffy made 3 starts late in the year, and in 16 innings pitched, collected 2 wins, only gave up 16 hits, only walked 6, and had 16 strikeouts. So not bad for a guy that started the year as a 23-year-old in Fort Myers, and Cody probably covers it in the stat pack, but dude won 13 games. He was 13-3. So he's a guy that I don't think gets enough recognition for the season that he had, because he pitched basically in the shadow of a 6-foot Jose Barrios. The other guy that I have listed that I don't think major guys' list, which is because you guys just didn't try hard enough, was Max Murphy. And I mean, I don't even know that I have to defend him. I mean, what more do you want out of the guy? He gets drafted exactly where I said he was going to get drafted, and that's probably why I feel the way I do about him. But he gets drafted in the 9th round, goes to Elizabethton, rakes, gets called up to Cedar Rapids, still wins the Player of the Year in the Appy League, and scouts at the games are shocked that this guy got out of the 3rd round. So, you look at it and say a 9th round pick. I look at it and say a 3rd round guy that dropped. How are you not going to have the 3rd round guy in the top 30 when he does what he did in Elizabethton? And then after playing a whole college year and the 35 games in E-Town, goes to Cedar Rapids, where he wasn't great, but he put up like Trevor Plouffe type numbers, and we love Trevor Plouffe. So, those are my 2 guys that I probably would start my team with before you guys would pick them. What about you, Seth? Who do you like so much?
Well, first of all, you had Duffy somewhere in the low teens. I had him at 16, and it looks like Cody had him about 20. So it's not like we're forgetting about him by any means. The guy that I have real high. Oh, no, I was going to say the thing about Duffy, and you mentioned Wheeler, that impressed me on both of them, and both of them rose up my rankings quite a bit from last year, but also from, say, middle of this year, is because they got better as they moved up. They both started this year at Fort Myers and then did better when they were at New Britain. And you and I talked about it a lot. We assumed maybe that Duffy was just going up to Rochester for a start, but he continued to pitch there for the final 3 or 4 starts of the year. So, but my guy is Taylor Rogers, and he's the guy that I get kind of yelled at and stuff online about, how I have him ranked so high. When I did my preliminary list, I had him at, I think, number 9. And by the time that I did this finally, he did drop to 11, which is still much higher than I know you guys had him. Left-handed, he's the long, lanky build. He was reported by, I believe, Mike Radcliffe that he was throwing 95 miles per hour left-handed with a good slider. Honestly, I would say this. I wouldn't be surprised, if he, in 3 years, if he's starting in the big leagues, ahead of some guys that I have ranked higher who I think will maybe probably be in the bullpen. So, of course it's impossible to know, but, he doesn't strike out a ton, but I just think he profiles into a solid number 3 type of a starter, which if he becomes a number 3, I should probably even have him higher.
Yeah, my thing with Rogers is that he struggled to strike people out. But, I like Duffy, and Duffy actually struck out less per 9. So, but that's different, and that's because Duffy started figuring stuff out this year, and didn't really have it figured out before. Even though Duffy did throw part of a no-hitter in his first game in Cedar Rapids last year. So,
right.
The nice thing is, all kidding aside, that there are pitchers in the organization, whether it's 11 or 15 or 17, or they're 1 year or 2 year or 4 years away. There's pitchers in the organization that you can look at and not have to dream on to say, hey, they could be a number 3 starter or better.
Right.
And the first year doing this, for Cody and I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I didn't feel like I looked at a lot of guys when I ranked those players and thought, yeah, these guys could be a number 3 or better starter. I felt like there was Kyle Gibson, and then what else really was there? You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I am this year, and whether it's Wheeler or Rogers or Duffy or the younger guys like Thorpe or Barrios or Cole Stewart, any of those guys, I feel like the depth is so much better now than it was last year or the year before that or even 2 years before that.
If I look at my list, I have Logan Darnell at number 30 and Sean Gilmartin at number 28. And if things were to break well for them next year and opportunity was there, I can see them being back end of the rotation starters or quality left-handed relievers, and big league contributors in a solid way that you would be happy to have through an arbitration year or 2. And that's saying a lot when those guys are in those top 30s. Cody, we'll get to you here on your list, and maybe there's a couple of guys that jumped in your mind.
Yeah, I guess the one guy that I have that isn't on either of your list is Felix Jorge, who had, we'll say, a rough go on his first shot at the Midwest League this year. So obviously that isn't why I have him where I have him ranked. But after he went back down to Elizabethton, where he was still, he was only 20 years old this year, about half a year younger than the average age of the other pitchers in that league. So still decently young, and he did improve on his numbers there from what he had put up in 2013. I know some of the scouting reports have couple ticks down on his velocity and stuff like that, but I still think that, he's young enough, has a decent frame and can, maybe with his second taste of the Midwest League this year, make the improvements that he needs to make to continue to end up being, back end of the rotation type guy, or just, a bullpen guy at the major league level. Other than that, I don't know if there was a guy that really, compared to you guys, that I have higher or lower. I mean, for the most part, most of my other guys were around where you guys have them, without giving away, too much.
Yeah, and we were talking before we came on the show live here about and I think it's a good thing. I have all of my top 30 prospect lists going back to 2006, and it's fun for me to look at those and realize that we're often wrong. We can definitely be wrong. And there is, and I say it all the time, there is no perfect way to know if a prospect's going to be good. First rounders bust, and 48th rounders make it to the big leagues, and sometimes non-drafted guys do become stars. So, I mean, there's no real formula to figure this out. That said, it's kind of fun to take a look and remember some of these names. I mean, I'm looking right now at the 2007 list, and I see I have number 26, Oswaldo Sosa, or, number 8, Alexander Smith. I mean, there's just some fun names. Johan Pino was my number 28 prospect in 2007. So, I mean, it's fun to look at that, too, and kind of reminisce about that. So, any other final thoughts? We'll give each of you a minute or two to kind of summarize, and we'll try to get just some final thoughts. We want to again remind people that our 2015 Minnesota Twins Prospect Handbook, more information will be available at Twins Daily within the next few days, certainly by the end of the week. And, we're looking sometime towards the end of next week or very soon after that for releasing it. Obviously, if anyone's interested, if you're interested in a book for yourself, or maybe a Twins fan who it would be perfect for, go ahead and we'll make sure that information for how you can order that's available at Twins Daily, on our Twitter feeds, and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So, any last thoughts? And then we are going to take a few questions that we did receive in the chat room at Twins Daily. Jeremy's going to hopefully maybe run through those. But Jeremy, what are your final minute of thoughts?
Well, I was just looking back at the original handbook, and you put a sleeper watch in bold and in parentheses on Charles Nolte.
He went to the Yankees,
and that to me just blew my mind. I mean, honestly though, it's fun to do it at the time. I mean, it was fun for us to do what we did this year. But it's also fun to look back when these guys, when they make it, and to look back 2-3 years ago what we thought about them and what was being said about them, and it's great to look through it and have that information now. But like you said, going back and realizing, man, you can hit on some guys and miss on some guys, and that's why I find it funny that we had an actual discussion about Max Murphy versus Zach Larson. We didn't have it on air, but it's like, who the heck knows?
Right.
And it's like we can look at everything, and I firmly believe that I'm right and you're crazy, and you just think I'm hilarious, and it's not even close. And that's what's fun. It's like we're both looking at the same stuff. I mean, we're probably not talking to the same people, but the numbers that are in front of us are the exact same for both of us, and yet our opinions are completely different, and that's why it's fun for me. I think that's my minute.
Go ahead, Cody. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just as we've been putting the final touches on the book this year, I think as I've been reading through like the articles that we've written, and more importantly, some of the articles that the other people have written, there's some really good content in this book, and I think I mean, just all the quotes that we have from You know, some of the people in the front office from the Twins, some of the scouting guys, from the players themselves that were out there every day, you know, grinding it away with these players. I mean, this is some inside look into the life of being a minor leaguer. And yeah, I mean, there's some articles in this year's book that are just top-notch stuff. And yeah, people need to go pick it up.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of end with a couple of other thoughts. I remember when I first started blogging in 2003, I believe. That seems like a long time ago, and it sounds kind of either pathetic or cool. But you know, I mean, nobody cared about the minor leagues other than the people at Baseball America, and I'm sure Jeremy at that time already was following Baseball America too. But you know, there wasn't this need for all this minor league information, and now I know. You know, at Twins Daily, some of our busiest days are the draft. And that tells me that not only have people started continuing to follow more and more the minor leagues, but as soon as the Twins are drafting these guys, they care and the fans care. And maybe it's because they've been so bad the last 4 years that it's something to hope on. But I also think the Twins do have a strong system. You know, it is fun kind of debating, and I always view this since I started as it's kind of a coffee table type of a book where you've got a couple of these, and while you're watching the Twins game and the FSN people show a minor league note or something like that, and they just throw a name out there and the guy went 2 for 4 or whatever, you can go back to your handbook and just take a look at it and find out a little bit more about them, you know. You know, my biggest thing is there is no direct path to the big leagues, no matter where you're drafted or not. You know, there's a lot of college seniors that played this year in the system and did really well. You know, Mitch Garver's one of those. Jason Kanzler's one of those. And those guys, even though they may never show up as high on prospect rankings because they're quote-unquote older than the regular competition, all they need to do is look at Brian Dozier at second base for the Minnesota Twins. He was an 8th-round pick as a senior in college, and he made it up to the big leagues in less than 2 years as a 24-year-old. So I mean, there's you know, you just never know, and so I appreciate all the support I've been given in doing these for 7 years, and I know probably speaking for Jeremy and Cody and thanking you for the support you've given us since then. And now we've already gone a few minutes long, but why don't we get to a couple of questions, Jeremy?
Absolutely. Lightfoot789, who is good at the questions on Twins Daily, asks to assess the prospects and what's the best way to develop them, and he gives 3 choices. Promoting mid-season to allow a player to adjust and prepare for the off-season, because he's obviously would probably repeat that level. That would be 1, so mid-season promotion. 2, stay at a level for an entire year to master the level. And his 3rd choice is promote players toward the end of the season to allow them to learn a level going into the off-season. So 1 and 3 are kind of similar, but what are your guys' thoughts as far as how to develop prospects? What's the best way?
Cody, do you have a sense on that one?
I don't know. For me, it's going to be a case by case basis more than anything, and knowing. I mean, I can't. It's not like a general answer. Like this strategy is best for prospect A or prospect B. I mean, you got to look at each guy and who they are. I mean, the Twins. You know, like with Nick Gordon this year, they knew they had him skip the GCL and go right to Elizabethton because they felt like his makeup, his pedigree, what they had scouted about him, knew that he could handle that level. Where you know, some other guys, they might know more about him and say that he's not ready to make that jump. I mean, if I was doing it off of these choices just alone and not knowing anything about the prospects, I think I would be more in favor of the option 1, probably like a mid-season promotion. And I think that's the path that the Twins seem to take with a lot of their prospects.
I'm going to kind of agree with that. I think it has to be a case by case scenario. I mean, for instance, Jorge Polanco this year in Fort Myers, he was ready to move up to New Britain when he was moved up. You could argue it may have even could have been done a month earlier. His makeup and also the numbers he was putting up. Whereas a guy like Adam Brett Walker, who I know Lightfoot is referring to often in these types of questions, I think he needed to stay in the Florida State League the whole year because there were things they needed to work on despite the power numbers, offensively and defensively. And more important, it has to be more than just about the statistics. You can't just look at a player's numbers, although sometimes that certainly helps make it more obvious. To tell whether or not they're ready for the next level. So I don't think you can have a one answer fits all. Now, the Twins typically like to have guys in Cedar Rapids spend their whole year there and then split a year between Fort Myers and what was New Britain, or their AA affiliate this year will be Chattanooga. But that's not always the case. So, everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's where I would lean to, but I think so much of it is mental, and I just think of my experience coaching people, and obviously it's a little bit different when you're a 19, 20-year-old professional than when you're a middle school or high school boy, but you for a lot of people, you can't put them in a position to fail and then expect them to get better.
Right.
For some people, you
Right.
can put them in a position where mentally that they can just handle it. And I think, just for an example, and Cody can probably relate to this because I know he coaches basketball. The basketball I'm coaching right now, I made the suggestion to the other coach, maybe we should bring that kid off the bench. And he said, there's no way I'm not starting him. He said, I know he's not one of the best five, but our whole team's going to come down if he's going to sit and pout about not starting, but then has no problem, flip-flopping two other kids that can handle it. And I think that's one of the things you have to look at too. Jorge Polanco, from everything we've ever heard, is advanced mentally, where he was going to come up to Minnesota, and regardless of how he did, he was going to go back down and still perform. And Kenneth Vargas, I think, from what we've heard, here's a guy that's always in a good mood, whether he's in a 20-game slump or 20-game hitting streak, his attitude's the same. And I think you can treat those guys differently. Now, you don't necessarily hear about those guys that don't always handle things well, but Aaron Hicks might be one of those guys that you have to let do well longer so that the confidence isn't such a huge part of the equation. So obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but I think it's a case-by-case basis that really involves a lot. The numbers are a small part of it, and the mental makeup and that development's probably much, much greater.
Well said.
Okay, next question. And this, I think, this is more Seth, because this is more where you deal with. Do you ever ask front office personnel what they expect from prospects going into a season? What is their progression curve in terms of development? And he's asking about the Harrisons, Walkers, Keplers, Goodrams, etc. Now, I deal more with the scouting side of things and try to get that perspective. And once they're signed and sealed, those guys don't have a whole lot of influence on what happens after that. But I know, Seth, the people that you talk to maybe could help answer that question a little bit better.
It's one of those things where you kind of have to be careful how you ask that kind of a question. You can say, what are you hoping for, or what does this player need to do to develop? That's a question I've asked some, and that's a response that I have from a Twins front office person in the book, often asking, what do they need to do to take that next step and to continue moving up the ladder. And they'll answer that, but they're not going to say I'm looking for him to hit 15 home runs or 30 home runs or hit 340 or get on base via walk for 40%, 80% of the time, whatever it is. Obviously, that was a bit excessive, but for a guy like Travis Harrison, obviously for him this year, coming into the year, it was try to develop into a solid left fielder and continue to progress as a hitter, which he probably did in all ways except for home runs. Or Walker, just continue to do that while also trying to cut down on the strikeout rate and take more walks. And even if it's not taking more walks, it's more often laying off those sliders low and away. I mean, each player, again, you hate to go to that, but each player is going to be kind of an individual thing, and it's not always going to be, straight numbers based. It's going to be about makeup, and it's going to be about handling situations, or more important, about learning from those previous mistakes. I mean, if you're swinging at sliders low and away at the beginning of the year, and you're still doing it at the end of the year, that's pretty disappointing. So, I mean, that's kind of a not exact answer, but you're not going to get exact answers again because there are no exact answers in baseball.
Right, and I think just to piggyback on that, I think if you would have asked scouts who saw Jake Reed what path they would have put him on, I would guess a lot of them, would have said he'll go be a reliever in Elizabethton, maybe move up to Cedar Rapids at the end of the year, and then we'll try him as a starter to start the next year.
Right.
But I asked that question to a scout that saw him, and he said, because that's typically my question. Like Nick Birdie, as soon as he was drafted, is he going to start? And that was a no. And my question about Jake Reed was, any chance that he becomes a starter? And obviously this is from the scouting perspective that don't have their hands on those players anymore. But he said with the way he's played this year, there's no way that he's ever converted to a starter. Now I don't know if that's necessarily 100% accurate, but a lot of it is how are they going to do, and once they've done it and beat it and shown their niche, that's the way the Twins are going to roll. Last question, unless Cody has something to add to that.
No, you guys nailed it out of the park.
Cody's just waiting for like the
beer.
What's your beer segment called? Beers around
Beers from around the world.
That's the one. That's what he's waiting for.
Yeah,
I drink beers, so
you would be ridiculed mercilessly.
by Eric and
I get
by
that
Eric.
a lot.
Yeah, by the beer snobs that I work with.
By Eric and Paul Price.
Yeah.
I would really.
Well, that was totally meant in honor of Paul's wedding. It was like a wedding gift to him and your entire listenership.
Yes.
That's right. Okay,
all 6 of them.
Yeah.
So, last question here, Cody. We'll give you a shot at this one because we love putting you on the spot as a guest. As a guest here, who do you think? This is from O Twins. I believe that's O Twins. Could be Zero Twins. Who do you think the Twins could lose in the Rule 5 draft?
Let's see. So I'm trying to think of guys that are even eligible off the top of my head. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, Seth, your turn.
All right. Well, I think the name we hear most often is Sean Gilmartin, just because he's left-handed and he's a college guy, so he's already I think 23, 20, well, probably 24, and most people think he's got enough stuff to be a decent bullpen guy if needed. Other names, I mean, I've floated out there like Ryan O'Rourke, who could probably be a situational lefty even now. And then Levi Michael, if there's a team willing to have an extra bench spot for a guy who can play, all 3 infield positions, though a lot of people question how much he should be on the left side of the infield, and he can run the bases and things like that. So I don't really think he's likely. And, as far as the minor league portion of the draft, it's almost impossible to know because we don't see those reserve lists that they have for the AAA and AA rosters. You just kind of never know who's going to be left out there. What do you think?
Gilmartin is the name that comes up, and I guess I wouldn't be shocked if he got drafted. I would not be. I would be even less shocked if he was offered back to the Twins, and I think the Twins are in a position right now where they could probably swing a deal to get something in return for him. If he were to clear waivers and be offered back to the Twins. Nico Goodrum is a name that, I'm not as high on him prospect-wise as I used to be, but I think that there's potential in there as a guy that could stick for a while, as a 25th guy that could come in and pinch run. I think you give him, when you get him into spring training, if you draft him, you give him an outfielder's mitt and see if he can if he can run around and catch some fly balls, because then he could maybe stick as a super utility guy. His bat's not anywhere near where it should be, but if you want to bring him in late in the game to run, and then he could just fill a spot in the outfield or at third base for an inning, which is kind of scary. But guys with that type of skill set are intriguing. Also, guys that throw real hard. I even saw Adrian Salcedo listed as a guy that could draw some interest. So,
Certainly.
I think as far as the Major League Rule 5 goes, a lot of time and thought and energy is put into it, and then not a whole lot happens. It's the guys that that get drafted from the minor league reserve list, like Seth said. We have no idea who they are, and I think that's probably where your activity will go, and guys that we're not even, guys that we're aware of, but not aware of where they're actually on a reserve list. So, I think that kind of does it. Let's do one last quick thing before we sign off, even though we're going to go 30, 35 minutes an hour, nearing an hour. It's a good thing that Cody's almost over in the mountain time zone. It's not as late over there.
Right.
So tomorrow's a big day from the sense of tendering contracts to arbitration eligible. So at this point, the Twins have Trevor Plouffe, Brian Dunsing, Tommy Malone, Casey Fien, Jordan Schaefer, Eduardo Nunez. Okay, Swarzak is out, so there's 6 guys. Let's just go through them. Yes, they're going to be back, or no, they're not going to be back, just based on 26 hours from now. Trevor Plouffe.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd agree. Brian Dunsing.
No.
Yes.
I'm going to roll yes, even though I'm hoping for no. So he'll be one to watch. Tommy Malone.
Yes? Question mark?
Yes, though I'm less sure about it than I am about Dunsing.
Yes, he'll be back. There's no way that they don't tender him a contract. Casey Fien.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Jordan Schaefer.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. And last but not least, the World All-Star, Eduardo Nunez, or the U.S. All-Star, I guess he was.
I say yes, but I don't feel good about it.
I'd say yes.
I'm going to just throw the dice down and say no, because easily replaceable, and his hat falls off and it drives me nuts.
Yeah, I can't stand that either.
Okay. Seth, give us a parting shot, because you're so darn good at it, and you're starting to get tired, and I know you got a blog yet tonight.
Well, I was only going to mention that the Twins did fill out their coaching staff under Paul Molitor today by adding first base coach Butch Davis, who has spent the last 20 years as a hitting coach and a roving instructor, base running, outfield, those are the roles he'll play with the Twins coaching staff too. Bunting, base running, and outfield. Most important thing about him, though, is that he had a cameo appearance in the movie Bull Durham, which is pretty cool. So they do have their full staff. It's Paul Molitor, Joe Vavra, Tom Bernansky, Neil Allen, Rudy Hernandez, Gene Glynn, and now Butch Davis. So kind of nice to have that done. Now they can start adding players.
Should I admit that when I read the name Butch Davis, the face that immediately popped into my head was Butch Husky, and I knew that just wasn't right?
I kind of had the same thought too, and then I saw the Bull Durham thing, and I was like, no, that was Crash Davis.
So, is his nickname Crash?
No.
Oh, brother.
Should I watch Bull Durham?
You should.
Yes.
He was in there quite a bit.
Okay.
You've never seen Bull Durham?
I think I watched it when I was younger, and then I think I was young enough that my parents were like, oh, you can't watch this scene, and then I was like, well, then I'm not watching it.
Yeah, you're going to want to watch that. It's arguably the best movie ever for baseball.
Truth.
All right,
I don't
Cody.
even know if it's arguable. I think it just is.
Cody, what beer did you drink during our recording tonight?
Nothing. Just water.
Water.
I have
high
to save.
quality.
I have to save my good beers for Thursday night's festivities.
I thought you were recording on Friday.
Oh no, Thursday.
I thought I read that somewhere. No?
I hope not.
Okay.
I got big things to do on Friday.
All right. That sounds great. Hey, what we're going to do is we're going to take our half-hour show, we're going to supersize it and make it an hour show. And we're going to make no promises when we'll record again, but we will let you know exactly when the handbook will drop. We'll drop it like it's hot here in a couple of, that'll be before a couple of weeks, I would say. Was that a hootie hoo back there or not?
I got the rollie on my arm and I'm pouring Sean Don. And no, never mind.
Okay. So we got Pharrell on the beats. We got the Nodak Twins fan over there sipping
Holla.
the liquid.
Allah.
And I'm signing off for the evening for the three of us. Thank you for hanging out.